We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Well, g'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. And today I am thrilled to welcome Rebecca Lockwood and Tom Bauer, the authors behind The Cohesive Couple, a USA Today bestseller that's changing the way we think about relationships. Now, this isn't your typical couples therapy book. The Cohesive Couple introduces a transformative operating system for couples who want to achieve more together than they ever thought possible. What it is about creating bigger, bolder future with tools to help you escape the chaos, align your visions, and take action toward a meaningful, purpose-filled partnership. And a big question we're going to answer today is, isn't it counterintuitive to think about running your relationship like a business? Well, Rebecca and Tom are here to answer that and so much more. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us, Brandon. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, no, the pleasure's all mine. And something I have to mention, which I didn't in the intro, is Christine and I have been using this system. We had the great fortune of meeting Rebecca and her husband, James, at a Gottman relationship weekend. And they were just in the itty bitty early stages of developing this program and the software. And so, yeah, we're very proud to have been there from the jump. And we are achieving more than we ever thought possible. Like our 10-year goals have become 3-year goals. Our 3-year goals are like 90-day goals. It blows my mind how simple the system is and how it works. But enough of that. Rebecca, Tom, I want you both to take a moment to introduce yourself. Rebecca, take it away.
All right. Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. And we just love you and Christine. It's so amazing to have you as part of our community. My name is Rebecca Lockwood, business coach for many years, and took a lot of that business framework and applied it into my marriage with James. It's interesting. I was in a lot of amazing peer groups, growing, getting inspired, wanting to do big things. And my poor husband was back at home with kids and chaos and, 3 and 5-year-olds to talk to. So we were able to take some of those tools, put them into our relationship, get aligned on where we wanted. We realized that a lot of the conflict between us was less about us not being aligned and more about us not understanding how to support each other and how to go from kind of a win-lose to a win-win. So that's why we created the Cohesive Couple, and Tom helped make it beautifully simple and bring it to life. And it's been really excited to share it with you here today.
Wonderful. Yeah, and Tom. Hi, I'm Tom Bauer. Thank you very much for having me here. And I've also been a business coach for many years. And what's interesting is that we actually have 3 different use cases for the Cohesive Couple on the call today. We have Brandon, young baby, newly married, right? You've got Rebecca and James, right, who are kind of in their kids are now in 10 and 13-year-old stage, but they've been using it since the kids were 5 and 8 kind of a thing, and really developing it then. And then you have me kind of representing the older generation, if you want to call it that, where I'm on my second marriage. Our kids are out of the house, and we're wondering, what are we going to do? How do we live intentionally for the next 40 years together? And it's interesting. I actually used the model as Rebecca and I were starting to put it into form as a screening mechanism for my current wife, Wendy. So a little more story behind that, which I'm sure we'll get into later, but that's me. Thanks for having both of us, Brandon.
No, the pleasure's all mine. This is a real treat for me to be able to share this system and to share your insights and wisdom to our community, because any way you slice it, we are in relationships left and right. And I think many of the principles that you both teach apply to friendships, apply to business relationships. There's really a lot to glean from this. But let's start first and foremost with a question that I know many are going to be thinking is, if I approach my relationship like it's a business, won't we lose the love, the passion, the emotion around it all? Like, how does that come into play here? And how do we keep those lines really clean between looking strategically at how to run a relationship and then not muddying the waters with the emotional side?
Rebecca, why don't you take that first, and then I'll jump in with a little. You can give more of the how it's worked for you guys, and I'll give a little more of the kind of academic history of why it works and how it works. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. I've spent my career as a business coach working with companies looking really at three things, right? Are we aligned on where we want to go? Do we know what's really important to us? Do we have a true culture and a North Star? Are we getting the results that we want? Are we accomplishing the things that we want? Have we built in the habits to help us accomplish the things that we want? And then, are we a cohesive team, right? Are we working together well? Do we understand that, one person might approach the world differently or see the world differently or have differences in the way that they operate? And how are we maximizing our strengths and working together well? So it seems like these are pretty important things if you apply them to a relationship too. And so it was interesting, just sort of as we started to cobble this together and do some, bring in some of these tools, I'm like, man, this could really work for us too. And it was very, very helpful. So I'm not actually sure if that answered your question, but Tom, I'm going to pass it over to you to answer the question.
Yeah, sure. In working with a lot of couples and in seeing how Rebecca and James were using this system, I mean, all couples have an operating system, right? Whether they know it or not. Some, in fact, a lot have the chaos system, the firefighting system, where they're going from just one emergency to the next. Some have the procrastination or drifting system, where they're letting life take them, but they're not being intentional. And just like we do with companies, it's all about having that aligned vision where we're actually being intentional about our future. And in your intro, Brandon, you said how your 10-year goals are now becoming 3. I found the same thing with my wife, Wendy, where we accomplished 100% of our 3-year goals in 18 months. And that's because the whole system gives you that focus, clarity, and, a little bit of accountability. Interestingly, we've seen that really across the board. And what we found is that a moderate amount of structure actually produces the highest levels of alignment, the deepest levels of connection and intimacy, and actually the highest levels of achievement in couples. And so what we've really created here, and what Rebecca and James really started and created, is that there's a framework that allows you to take and adapt it to your own relationship, your own lifestyle. And as you see here on the podcast, 3 very different seasons of life. And yet it works for all of them. So it's about a moderate amount of structure and just a little bit of organization that gets you that incredible focus, clarity, and achievement.
I can resonate with that, what you said so much about the seasons, because when Christine and I fell in love and we found each other, of course, there's that, people call it the honeymoon phase, where it's just like, it's hot, it's passionate, it's exciting, everything's a yes, everything's a green light. And, then naturally, as we begin to settle our roots and fell pregnant, got married, all of those things, it's natural that some of that passion and that fire kind of turned down a little bit, because we started looking at, all right, we have a mortgage, we have bills, we have professional goals, we have things pulling us left and right. And what the system did in many ways was it gave us kind of guardrails to bring us back together, to be intentional about how we're steering the ship. Because I think it's naive to think that in Christine's relationship background and my relationship background, that our paradigms, our psyche around our own understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like, naive to think that us putting those 2 formulas together was going to create something that was seamless, that we would never have conflict around, that we would never fight over. We learned from our parents what to do, what not to do, and then coming together created our own kind of mess in a lot of ways. When that honeymoon phase was over, it's like, whoa, I'm going this way, you're going this way, you call me the gas, you call yourself the brakes. Like, how do we make this thing work? And this system couldn't have come at a better time, to be honest with you, because it did give us those guardrails as to how we steer our ship.
So interesting that you talk about gas and, the brakes, because one of the things that I applied from business was the Colby assessment. And as James and I looked at our own Colbys, we realized that so much of our conflict was really because the Colby is this assessment that helps you understand how you naturally operate. What's your first instinct? What are you naturally wired to do or problem solve? And I don't need a lot of information, and I'm a high risk taker. So that pushes us to do exciting things, but it can also create chaos along the way, right? And James, probably also the break, right? He needs a lot of information, and he's less risk adverse. So he needs to really understand before moving forward. And in the beginning, before we understood this about each other, I really felt like he was the brake all the time, trying to cramp in my style, right? And now what we've realized is I push him to do things that he might not have done. And he also slows me down to say, is this really a good move, before I go down a rabbit hole and I go, man, I wish I hadn't moved so quickly there. So it's given us this language to be able to speak with each other and kind of make jokes about what maybe in the past was creating conflict. Now I just know that I need to give him a little bit more time. Or, for example, in one of our quarterly meetings, I said, this Everest bucket list, going to Mount Everest base camp has been on your bucket list for a long time. Like, you're not getting any younger, honey. And, we got to do that this year, go to Everest with our son and touch the mountain, as he says.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point, Rebecca. And Brandon, you alluded to this earlier, that we bring a lot of things from what we saw from our parents. And what we found now in working with couples, and certainly what I see in my relationship with Wendy and her kids, is that we're modeling a relationship for them and they emulate us. So Rebecca and James are really modeling the values and the behavior that their children are going to take into the future. And we talk about legacy sometimes, and it's not the financial money you leave when you're gone. It's actually, what are you giving to your kids now? So our kids are out of college, they have great jobs, but we're modeling for them what a great relationship, what an intentional relationship can look like. Yeah. Other end of the spectrum, Brandon, you've got a young baby, but you're modeling behavior about how you solve arguments, how you challenge each other, how you work together for them.
So much of what you learn before you're 8 years old, right? And it's all stored here somewhere in the subconscious. And so I always think to myself, man, I wish I'd had this earlier, because I would have, shown up better, but you only know what you know, right? And so I think oftentimes it's not necessarily, we're not fighting about the thing, we're fighting about our belief about the thing, right? So we might not be fighting about money, but we're fighting about how you might have grown up differently and approached money differently. Yes. And we have to really understand those kind of underneath the surface before we can have a really good conversation around money that we're going to make progress on.
Oh, so well said. So well said. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into your story, Rebecca, because you open the book with talking about how you and James were on the brink of divorce. Like, things weren't pretty. You had young children. Can you set the scene a little bit to give us an idea of what were some of the symptoms that you were witnessing in your relationship, and then what were the actual deeper causes of those symptoms?
Yeah. We definitely were on we said the D word a lot of times, which is not a good thing to do. And we've committed never to say that word again. But I think, when I look back at it, we didn't have a way to make decisions together. So now, by knowing what our values are and knowing where we want to go, it's a lot easier to say no to things that come up where they don't align with our values. So before, we may have just been kind of operating unaware and not really realizing it. I think the biggest thing that we were able to do was work on our mindset. You can't show up in a relationship, in my opinion, as 50-50, right? You cannot expect your partner to make up when you have a bad day. They can be there to support you and encourage you, but at the end of the day, you have to show up as a whole person. So I think we were in completely, we say this in the book, right? We were in separate canoes in the same river. But if we didn't have kids, I'm 100% sure we would not be together. We would have said, this is not worth it. But neither of us wanted to be in a place where we were only seeing our kids 50% of the time. And at one point you have to make that decision. Is this him, or is this how I'm showing up in this relationship? And so I think each of us owning our own and taking responsibility of who we were and showing up as a full person, that's really why we're here today, is we both decided and committed that we wanted to be together, and we had to grow into that. So you're never going to get the relationship that your mindset isn't ready for. You have to be ready for that from a mindset perspective.
I think the other thing there, Rebecca, as you said, is that you can grow into it. So, what I've seen is that, yes, at different times you may be pacing a little bit differently at different seasons of life. But if you're committed to growing together, to walking alongside each other, not trying to leave the other person behind or take a completely different path. But if you're actually really committed to the commitment of growing together, you can support each other as you grow at different paces. And Brendan, as you said earlier, we're bringing different things in from our past, but also we're going to grow at different paces based on different things happening. And a lot of that does come back to mindset. And, the relationship that you want has to evolve with your mindset. But the great news is it's possible to grow there. It's possible to, wherever you start, whether you're already great, it's possible to get better. If you're not great right now, it's possible to get better. And so there's always that growth factor together.
Yeah. Something I can say truthfully from the experience, utilizing this framework, is it allows us more space to hold space for one another as we navigate challenging seasons. Because we have to sit down and we have to talk about, how did I serve you this week? How didn't I serve you this week? What am I grateful for? And, how can I get support next week? And it's really created that space for us to kind of have to sit there and go, yeah, it did not work for me this past week when XYZ happened, but always coming back to an ownership piece of, and I understand that's only challenging me because either there's a shred of truth in it, or my mindset needs to shift around it. And creating those openings in an intentional way has been really helpful. Whether it's for example, if we're talking about the Colby, I'm a quick start, right? Quick start's one of the kind of archetypes, I guess you could say, where it's I'm a high quick start, meaning I don't need a lot of information, much like Rebecca, and I'm off to the races. Whereas my wife needs a lot more information. She needs to see the research. She needs to see the information. And she's very high in the follow through, whereas I rank quite low in follow through. So I love to start things. I don't always finish them. Good thing I'm not into cars, because there'd be 6 of them parked outside my house right now, only halfway done. And it has allowed me the space to follow through because I want to show her that I can. And it's also allowed her to take some risks and jump off the ledge with me, because she wants to be a part of the adventure as well, and not always needing to qualify everything before saying yes. So it's allowing us both to kind of rise to meet each other's needs and how each other operates.
And I think it's, we have the same, I feel you right there. But now it allows you to park it somewhere, right? And know that, okay, you might not be ready to make a decision on this now, but it's going to be saved. And next week, we're going to come back to it after you've had that time to research or to digest it or to think about it. And now it doesn't fall off the wayside, but it's saved. You're right. It's about creating this space for those things.
And perhaps we could even back up a little bit there, because what you're both talking about is the weekly sync. right? And then the quarterly syncs. And I think that one of the big differences, and you guys both said you go to a Gottman retreat or you go to some other couples retreat, and it's great, and you're connected for 3 days. And I've done this too, and it's awesome. And then 3 months later, you're back into your old habits.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the consistency of our quarterly syncs with other couples in that community, which we'll get into in a second, I'm sure, but also just the weekly syncs, right? Just a weekly touch point. Let's take just 45 minutes a week, touch base, just have that time to connect. And my favorite part of the weekly sync is at the end when I can ask Wendy, what are you most looking forward to in the next week so I can make that happen for you or make sure that happens for you? In other words, the meeting ends, or our sync ends with, how can I best serve you in the next week? And I love that approach that we have in our weekly sync.
Now we're going to get into those syncs, but before we do, I want to talk about energy for a second.
My favorite.
I know the two of you travel all over, planes, trains, and automobiles to not just for your business consulting and coaching, but also for the cohesive couple. And I myself have to travel quite a bit through my work and balancing home responsibilities, children, work, connecting as a couple can oftentimes drain the tank. And so this is a great opportunity for us to mention our favorite sponsor, I could say. Take that, other sponsors. Is Magic Mind. You've heard it before if you've been listening to the show. A year ago, it probably was, where I hit a wall. Parenting, work, all of it was just piling up. Focus was gone, sleep was terrible, and I was just surviving each day. Couldn't feel like I was thriving, and I know my wife was in the same boat. And that's when we learned about Magic Mind, because Magic Mind reached out to the show, knowing the kind of audience that we have, or an audience committed to squeezing the most out of every day. Now, what we've learned in the journey of using Magic Mind is the difference between mental health and mental wealth, right? Investing in habits today that build resilience for tomorrow, kind of like a mental savings account. And I know when we talk about the emotional bank account a lot in our conversations, Rebecca and Tom, this is the mental savings account, which include the 5 pillars: sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, and the right tools are key. They really are. And Magic Mind has been a game changer for us. And all of you know, I joke about this all the time. My wife drinks all of them. By the time I get to them, most of them are drunk. So Magic Mind's focus shots start our mornings with clarity, energy that lasts. And while the sleep shots, which they're bringing out now, which are really cool, help us wind down at night for deeper rest. And just 5 days of using the sleep shots in conjunction with the morning shots have been awesome. I feel like we're able to tackle it from both angles. Now, Magic Mind has bundled these together in their 24 hours pack, combining focus and sleep shots at 45% off, only through the exclusive link below when you use the code MANKINDJAN. That's Mankind, JAN, at the end. And what you get with that are the focus shots, which deliver clean energy and stress reduction with no crash, and the sleep shots, which help you fall asleep faster and stay in deep rest. All of these are safe, doctor validated, and backed by over 200 scientific studies, plus every purchase supports mental health charities. So that is Mankind Jan at checkout, or use the link in the show notes if you want to get your hands on this stuff. Trust me, you will not regret it.
Brandon, it makes me think of one of our tools, actually, which is our balance wheel. And partnering with the balance wheel, one of the things that you do is actually pick a commitment to yourself for the quarter. And so I've had several quarters where sleep, or one of those big 5, has been a commitment to myself to make sure that I have the right energy to show up. So I love that. Got to check it out.
Balance wheel's a fun one. Yeah, because every quarter we get to check in and see how it changes over time. Relationship, health, work, all those things, keeping track of it, and watching them all gradually improve over time. You spoke before about modeling, Tom, and I want to dive into that a little bit. It gives us a sense of pride that we're doing this work proactively as opposed to reactively. And we were so fortunate to come across Rebecca and James at the Gottman workshop, because we met this couple that it felt like you were a snapshot 10 years into the future of what we wanted. I remember it because Christine came over and she's like, babe, I just met this awesome couple. They're doing van life, and they're like homeschooling their kids. And my ears just like immediately pricked up. And this was a relationship weekend for my wife and I, and me being the quick start and someone who doesn't always ask her opinion or her permission. I was like, what are you guys doing for dinner? And initially she was like,
dinner.
yeah, it was an amazing dinner. And I remember Christine being like, babe, this is our weekend for us. Why are you inviting another couple into this? And neither of us regret that decision because we got to see the life that you and James were creating, having built or implemented the system over time. And when we got together in Ohio and got to do an in-person workshop, the whole room was filled with couples that you knew through various different circles in life. And they all said the same thing. We want what they're having. We want what you're having. And so that really shows like the ripple effects here. We aim to be one of those couples, first and foremost for ourselves and what we're modeling for Bindi, but modeling for other couples around us and the friends around us that we love and care about. And we want them to thrive as well. And so what are some of the...
It's taken us a long time to get there. I'm actually getting emotional thinking about, where we were 10 years ago and where we are today. We've made some I can't even imagine where we are today from where we started. So it's been really an incredible journey. But you were going to ask me a question and I interrupted.
Well, it kind of transitions now into coupling this with community, because maybe 10 years ago, you might have been thinking, oh, I don't want anyone to look at this dumpster fire. Like, let's put on this image of perfect and happy and everything's great. Because for the couples out there, especially parents, there is this pressure to kind of put off an image that everything's perfect, everything's fine, which we all know in all relationships, nothing's ever perfect. But you bring in this community element where we never thought that we were going to be able to share warts and all, the good, the bad, the ugly in our relationship with other couples. I mean, speaking for Christine, that's like her nightmare scenario. Yet by the end of it, everyone knows each other's dirty business, and there's like so much love and respect in the room.
I think what's most personal is most general. Like what we all struggle with, everybody struggles with. And the fact that you can share that with others. I remember I've got a lot of examples of this, but I remember a moment in the room where a couple in our community had both of their parents had actually passed away that quarter. And it was just they were not coming into our meeting in a great headspace at all. And one of our couples was actually a widow and now in a great marriage. And it was this unbelievable pouring out of support and understanding and knowing that you're not alone. And it was unbelievably powerful. I had no words. I just got to observe this beautiful observation about how deeply we can build relationships with people when we truly open our hearts up. So I love the community. We've also got an amazing couple that are actually, they run their own marriage retreats. They're very involved in their church. They're both coaches as well, and they're amazing people. But we were going through one of our times together, and they said, hey, this is what we did every year. We did this check on various pieces and parts, and we did it for ourselves. It was kind of taking the balance wheel, but putting it on steroids once a year. And we did it with all of our kids. And it was at one of these, I looked at my daughter and I said, I want to understand how I can teach her what a great relationship looks like. And so this then caused him to take her on dates every week or every other week so that she could learn and be modeled the behavior by Alan on what it should look like to go on a date and how she should be respected. And it was just this amazing moment of you get to learn from people in these different seasons of life. So the community has been so inspiring for us to also make sure we're leveling up, constantly.
Yeah. Well, and this is so cool. And this is something that Kristen and I have in our plan, is you will take your son on a trip every year. James will take your daughter on a trip, and then vice versa. Those one-on-one relationships are part of your routines and your goals and your rituals. Which I just found that so neat and unique is, like you want to give them that experience where like James can wine and dine his daughter.
Yeah.
And take
We
her out and
actually,
make it feel special.
I get to leave on Monday with Lucas. And so this year is my year to go with Lucas. We're going to Hawaii and I'm super excited, but this has been an interesting, they have a budget. They have to build the itinerary. They have to find the flights. They have to find the hotel. They have to find all of those things and plan the whole itinerary. And so I've been traveling for a couple of weeks. And so Lucas is freaking out that we don't have our last campsite book. So that's my goal when I see him tonight. We have to book our last campsite so that we are not sleeping in the car.
And it's interesting because I'm going to give you a different perspective on how we took what Rebecca and James were doing and applied it to us. And that is that, both of our kids now are out of school. I'm now a grandfather. Freaking me out completely. But because that's not at all, I'm not at that age. I don't think that way. I'm still like 32. In any case, though, but outside, right now we would normally get together with them on holidays, right? Family gets together. But we've also taken that and said, we want to have some one-on-one time with you two as a couple and us as a couple. Going not outside of the rest of the family, outside of traditional holidays when we would normally get together. So that's part of our goals now, is scheduling those times to make sure that we're intentional about being close to them and knowing what's going on. So you're building those relationships not just when they're 6, 9, 10, 18, but after they get out of college as well.
Yeah, it's keeping them. Yeah, it's keeping that the kind of embers alive in those relationships. Yeah.
So, one of our why of why we're a couple for James and I is really about creating generations of families. And so we want our kids to want to hang out with us when they're old, and we want our grandkids to hang out with us. And so we're really intentional about trying to create those moments of connection. Especially today's world is so full of things that pull your attention away. And so really making sure that we're intentional about building those special moments. So I'm excited. Let you know, Hawaii.
Yes. I think you mentioned something there, Rebecca, that the model or the framework actually helps with. And Brandon, you alluded to it earlier. It's the consistency, right, of continuing to do those things, whether you're working on your relationship together or the relationship that you're building with your kids. Those things can get damaged very quickly and very easily, right? So we have to always be intentional and always be moving and always have that path and the community to support it, along with the tools to just keep us consistent in going forward. And I found that to be just incredibly beneficial to Wendy and myself. And to the people that we work with.
That's a really great point, because there are times, we try our weekly syncs, and we'll get into the anatomy of the syncs, SYNC for those listening. Sometimes they're a bit of a chore to even start, because it's like, oh God, like we finally have a moment away from our daughter and we can have this conversation, but we're exhausted. It's Sunday. We kind of want to just chill and relax. But once it starts, we're in it. Right, we see it through to the end, because the seemingly insignificant, right, the small little things in those weekly connections, they're not always sexy. They're not always as exciting as like going to our favorite restaurant and having a limoncello, but it makes those things possible. Jocko Willink says discipline equals freedom, right? You need structure to create freedom, which seems counterintuitive. And so it's like you need the unsexy to create the sexy. The unexciting to create the exciting, and not to say it isn't exciting, because we get excited as we dream together. We get excited but it's still working through that reframe of like, oh, family meeting, State of the Union, here we go every week.
Yeah, what we find is if we aren't able to consistently have them, then we end up arguing about something stupid that probably would have been avoided if we had just talked about it and spent the time. So for people that are struggling to find time for their meetings, it can be in the car while he's driving me to the airport, or it can be, I think you guys were doing it, at least the beginning part when you were
Costco.
Walking. Oh, Costco.
Yeah.
I thought it was walking your daughter to sleep at night.
30-minute drive to Costco. It's perfect.
There you go. It's perfect.
Yeah. Well, a quick aside, Tom, I want to ask you, this being your second marriage, and now having access to these tools, what can you say are some of the blind spots that you recognized in previous relationships and how you approach relationships that you're now aware of because of systems like this?
Yeah, so I think that in my first marriage, we both approached it with an operating system of I win, you lose,
Zero
which
sum.
in effect means I win, we both lose, right? When you really play out the whole model. And so we developed that pattern of where problem solving was keeping score, right? And it was a
Mm.
question of how many points could we score. We weren't putting the problem in front of us to solve together. We were looking at it as I get my way or you get your way. And so by putting the problem in front of us now, that's one of the big things that I've learned. Wendy and I are now looking at it. How do we create this so that we both can win? And that's a really, really key thing. Looking at the differences between those two was really that's a big shift in understanding.
I think a great visual to explain that is, and Rebecca, you mentioned it before, is we're married, we're unified, we're in the same river. Our rivers converged, right? But at some point, we got out of the same canoe, and now we're paddling our own way in our own boat. And there's opportunities to leave the river in that canoe, or what can we do to get back in the same boat and paddle in the same cadence together? It's like it's a you, there's a me, and then there's a we element to this, and operating from that we, right, the us piece gives me far more fulfillment as an individual in my own individual needs and interests that are completely separate from Christine's.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and we see this a lot when people are dreaming. You don't just your dreams don't have to exist one or the other. You can actually have both. So for James and I am not. I'm actually moved to the States when I was 12, and so I've been all over the world, and I really wanted my kids to experience that because I think we've got so many luxuries in America and seeing the world from a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I was like, I want to move overseas. I want to move overseas. Right. And James loves the white picket fence, staying in one place. I mean, we do live in a camper, so I guess I've worked on him a little bit, but, but it was very interesting. He loves the stability of America and the opportunity of America. And so now we can have both. Right. And so we can have that stability staying here, but we get to travel in a van or go and, see new things. And we try once a year to do something overseas that the kids get exposure to see how things can be in a different country. So the ability, like Tom said, to really think about how can we both get the dreams that we want to accomplish and how can we help support each other on those things.
And on those, dreams, it's interesting because what I experienced is that, Wendy learned how to dream. She could think of things in the future, but to her, those were just nice ideas. They might happen, they might not. And by kind of using the system and the consistency and a little bit of that structure, she now sees that, oh, this is how we actually make those things happen. So when we create those win-win situations, she now actually believes that they will happen for both of us and we help each other. And the beautiful thing there is then we get to celebrate each other's victories together. And that just builds that deeper connection, the momentum, and you just create that positive cycle of energy.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Momentum. That's what it is the momentum. And so much of it, the getting aligned part, right? Aligning a vision. We both brought our own chaotic psychology into our relationship, whether around money, whether around, just relationships as a whole, what commitment looks like. And when we finally could identify, but we didn't know how to communicate. We each had our own little tools and things we'd learned, but it wasn't quite lining up. And when we could identify where we actually aligned far more than we realized. On so many things, it's just she didn't use words that I liked, and I didn't communicate clearly enough for her, or whatever it is. And it's like, oh my gosh, we've been fighting about the stupidest things.
Yeah.
We actually want the same thing here.
Yeah.
We just don't know how to talk.
That's exactly right.
It's like, it's sending a signal, and is it being received? Like, plain and simple. And we're having two completely different conversations. And so getting clear on the why and the vision, like we both, our backgrounds on our computers is a penthouse apartment in Australia on the beach.
Awesome.
Looking, where we can just walk down and put our feet in the sand. Are we going to achieve that in our 30s? Not likely. 40s? Oh, maybe, but probably not. 50s, 60s? Yeah. And so we reverse engineer that. How do we make that happen? What are the things that we have to say yes to now, and the things we have to say no to?
Even more important,
right? That's one thing. You talk about values. Before, when we were in two different boats, we were making different decisions, thinking we were affecting the whole in a positive way, and we weren't. Whereas now, me being the dreamer, she's, I think, much happier that I'm not just like blah, 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 blah. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. I want to do that. Because the filter it has to go through is, does that
align?
Invest in our future, in what we've aligned on.
Does that align with where we're going long term? Otherwise, why are we doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't sound like Charlie Brown's parents anymore when I talk about dreams, because all she heard was wah, 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 wah.
I think that's been so interesting. James says this a lot. It's like when you start getting the small wins, for somebody that dreams were just this sort of more airy-fairy type of thing, you start getting the small wins, and then you're like, oh, wow, I can do this. And it gives you the confidence to start to dream bigger and push yourself more.
Yeah, so good. So nuts and bolts. Let's get into some nuts and bolts, because we've got a short amount of time before we have to sign off. The weekly sync. So let's just give the listeners somewhere to start, right? And I know the starting point is more likely the bigger vision, the bigger goals, but I think that's a great reason for people to click on the links in the show notes and find more about how to get more involved. But for those that just want to get started with what a good weekly meeting can look like as a couple, what's the anatomy of that?
Yeah. So, we can definitely walk you through that. We also, I think you're going to put the link to our website.
Sure will.
And there's a resources tab that you can actually download the full agenda of the weekly sync. You can also get the CVP, or the Cohesive Vision and Plan, which is that one-page vision and plan that you can start to have really amazing conversations around. So both of those tools are available, and that's really where I would start. But yeah, anatomy of a weekly sync. Tom, you want to walk us through that?
Sure. So, the way, first of all, let's just say that, we don't call it a meeting, we call it a sync, because that describes it's not a meeting, it's a sync. Let's get together and just make sure we're in sync. And it's only, even if you follow our agenda, about 45 minutes long. Which, if you're wondering, that's about 0.4% of your week. If your goal is 10,000 steps, that's 40 steps, just to put it in perspective. It's really not a huge amount of time to commit to talking with each other. But we start out with gratitude, right? And that's really, what are you most grateful for over the last week? And that does a couple of things. It sets a positive tone. But for me, it reminds me, wow, even though I'm pissed off about this, that's really a first world problem. I've got all these other things I really should be happy about. And then we have some questions that we ask the couples to talk about around, how was I in this last week? How did I show up? And those can spur some great conversations. And Rebecca, one of the questions there is, how connected do I feel to you? And you tell a great story about when you gave it maybe not a 10. You want to tell that story a second?
Yeah, sure. So we do ask this question, and I shout out to Chad Johnson, who was my coach and strategic coach. I got this question from him, but how connected? What's your connection score? And then what's one thing that I can do to increase that score next week? And so it's just been really powerful to not worry about blame, but if you're feeling disconnected, how can I increase that connection, and how can I show up better for you this week? So yeah, definitely. For sure.
And last week Wendy was like, I just didn't really feel connected to you in this last week. And I said, is there anything that I can do? And she gave me something. And so we're doing that. And it's just, it's a real little thing that she asked, but that just made all the difference in our communication and our vibe and the energy that we were bringing. And then after that, in the agenda, really the things we're talking about is, are our calendars in sync? Are we making the little steps forward on our goals and objectives? Did we get our to-dos done? And just, simple things like, hey, when are you coming in this week? Or when are we going to dinner? And then, as I said, in the next, really, we give some time in there to just, what's on your mind? What are some things that we need to talk about? And those could be as mundane as, who do you want to go to dinner with next week? Could be a topic. It could be as serious as, what school do we want our kids to go to? Do we need to pre-register them for something? So it just gives you that space to talk about whatever you need or feel you need to talk about that week. And then we end with a look forward. And the point there is not to solve everything that's going on, but to just take baby steps. And I think, Rebecca, you said earlier, hey, if we don't get to a solution right now in this 45-minute section, that's okay. We can come back next week and pick it up, because some of those bigger things will take time for us to digest and think about and say, how do we make this a win-win? So Wendy and I have found it just to be an incredibly powerful tool, even when life has been crazy, chaotic, and uncertain, to just keep us focused and connected.
Yeah. Focused and connected. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think really, if you think about what we're intending this to be, is it's easy for us to procrastinate our goals, and this helps keep it front and center, helps check up on our connection, and then helps provide that space of, instead of having to have all these one-off conversations where you can miscommunicate throughout the week, you have a place that you can park it and then make a really productive 45 minutes. You get it all out of the way and you're really leaving with a good plan for the week.
I love that you say that, place where you can park it, because I know something that Christine doesn't appreciate is when I bring up all these little things right in the middle of her workday or whatever it is. And so using your app, I just go in and put it in our notes. And just, it goes in the notes. And then during the weekly sync, then we can talk about it, right? It's not to say we're not going to talk about this. It's just, we're not going to talk about it now. And we have a place when we can.
And you can show up in the right mindset, because you're supposed to talk about things at that point, as opposed to you text her and she had just gotten a bad email or something happened at work and she's not in the right frame of mind to worry about the issue that you're bringing to her at that time.
Yeah.
What I really like is that by putting it on the list, by capturing our to-dos, is that when I ask, or I'll flip it around, when Wendy asks me, hey, Tom, did you do that? You said you, and I say, no. I don't feel like she's blaming me or getting mad at me. She's just saying, hey, then we can ask each other about follow through and follow up in a way that's productive and doesn't feel like, hey, did you do that yet? It feels very positive because we've given each other permission to do that. And it really just creates an incredible momentum. I love that word. We just keep rolling forward, crashing through roadblocks together.
Final question before we wrap up. This framework is already having impact. Obviously, I've shared our testimonial all throughout this episode. But really, what is the shoot for the moon kind of vision you have for the impact this book, your programs are going to have in the world? So say it's happened. What does the world look like now?
So I would love that people get this framework as a wedding present instead of a crock pot, right? They're set up.
turkey dish, yeah.
So they are set up for success. I really want to help couples thrive. James and I say that it did not have to be as difficult as it was for us. And had we had what we have now, if we had had that years ago, we've grown through it and we've come out stronger, but man, it would have just helped us a lot. So our goal is to help couples thrive everywhere.
And the reason behind that in helping couples, I mean, obviously I went through a very ugly divorce, and I don't wish that on anybody. And had I had this, I probably would have had some different outcomes there. And so, looking forward, our goal is to help couples thrive, because we believe that great couples can create great communities and great children and great people around them. And those great communities can then go on and actually have a big impact on the world itself. So yes, we'd love to just have 1 million couples. We'd love for this to be on every wedding registry in the world. That maybe the world was too big of a shot, but that's where my head goes.
Why not? No,
why not? Right?
Well, Rebecca and Tom, this has just been such a joy for me to have two worlds collide here. Christine and I are so grateful for the impact that you've both, and James, of course, who isn't with us in this call, have had on our lives. And it's just,
thank you.
It's amazing how everything just feels so intentional. That we're building and working towards.
So blessed to have you with us.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
It's an absolute joy. And so the call to action to all of you out there.
This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA.
Links will be in the show notes.
We have been your hosts, Boyson Hodgson and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, of course, you can find links to them in the show notes.
Biggest thanks has to go to you.
Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes.
Absolutely.
Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.
Hey, it's Boyson here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you. Hey, it's Boyson. On the Mankind Podcast, we've brought some incredible guests on to talk about the importance of doing the work to improve our mental and emotional health. And here's the truth. Multiple times over the last 25 years, I've had the help of one-on-one work with some amazing therapists. For me, for my wife, for both of us as adoptive parents, and for our kids. The Mankind Project and Men's Group, though awesome, are not a substitute for professional mental health support. And so I'm thrilled that the Mankind Podcast now has BetterHelp as a sponsor for the show. BetterHelp works online. It asks you what you're working on and then matches you for live one-on-one sessions with a licensed therapist, someone trained to work with you, listen, and offer helpful insights. I'm using BetterHelp. It's super easy, and I like what I'm getting. If getting one-on-one support in the comfort of your own space feels like a good direction for you, I invite you to check it out. Go to the link in the show notes or betterhelp.com/mankind. And if you sign up, you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy.